"Who authorized you to be in this room?" The question hit like a slap. I said, "Who let you in here?" Reginald Okafor didn't answer right away. He looked at the man asking, pressed shirt, silver cufflinks, the particular kind of confident that comes from never being questioned, and then looked back at the server rack in front of him. The red error light was still blinking. It had been blinking for 11 hours. "Building management," Reginald said quietly. "They called me." Building management. The man, his name was Stuart Caulfield, Senior VP of Infrastructure at Vantex Capital. Repeated it the way people repeat things they find offensive. He turned to the two engineers standing behind him. One of them, a younger guy with a Caltech lanyard, covered his mouth with his fist, not coughing. The other one looked at the ceiling. "Building management called a handyman to look at a Tier 4 data services," Reginald said. "They called the building's contracted IT services," Reginald said. Caulfield laughed, not a real laugh. Not a real laugh. The kind that's designed to fill a room with contempt. "This system manages $2.3 billion in active trade settlements. It has been offline since 4 a.m. We have flown in 2 certified network architects from our Chicago office. We have our primary vendor on a conference call that has been running for 9 hours. And building management sent us." He gestured at Reginald the way you gesture at a piece of furniture you're about to move. "You." Reginald finally turned around. He was 51 years old. 5'11", broad across the shoulders, wearing a collared shirt with his company's logo embroidered over the chest pocket. His hands were the kind of hands that have opened 10,000 panels, pulled 10,000 cables, and learned to read heat and resistance through their fingertips the way other people read text. Caulfield looked at his cufflinks. "I can come back," Reginald said, "or I can keep working." He turned back to the rack without waiting for an answer. Caulfield stared at the back of his head for a moment. Then he walked out of the cold room, pulling the door behind him hard enough that the seal hissed. The Caltech lanyard guy exhaled. His name was Preston Marsh, and he had been awake for 19 hours, and he was starting to develop the specific kind of desperation that comes from being very smart in a room where your intelligence has stopped being useful. He watched the older man work. Reginald didn't ask for a laptop. Didn't ask Preston anything at all. Didn't ask Preston the rack and looked at all. He just stood in front of the rack, and the way he looked at it made Preston uncomfortable in a way he couldn't fully explain. It wasn't the look of someone trying to figure something out. It was the look of someone who had already started understanding and was waiting for the last piece to confirm what he already knew. The Vantex Capital data center occupied the entire subbase tower of a 40-story glass tower in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina. Not a server closet, not a converted utility room. A purpose-built, climate-controlled, redundant power, fully monitored Tier 4 facility that had cost $19 million to construct and another $4 million to certify. Humidity kept at exactly 45%. Temperature at 68 degrees year-round. 2 independent power feeds from separate utility substations. Diesel backup generators rated for 96 hours of autonomous operation. Biometric access at 3 separate checkpoints before you reach the main floor. The kind of infrastructure that was specifically designed to never, under any circumstances, go down. It had gone down at 4:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not completely. The facility's redundant systems had kept the physical hardware alive. The servers were running. The power was clean. The cooling was nominal. But the network fabric, the invisible architecture that stitched every server to every other server, that routed trading data from execution systems to clearing systems to settlement systems, had fractured, was flowing into the facility and disappearing. Orders were being received and not confirmed. Positions were being marked and not reconciled. By 6 a.m., Vantex's chief operating officer had declared an internal emergency. By 7 a.m., their primary infrastructure vendor, a firm called Meridian Systems, whose engineers held every relevant certification in existence, had 2 people on site and 3 more on a video bridge. By 9 a.m., Meridian had run full diagnostics on every switch, every router, every fiber pod. Every component tested clean, no corrupted firmware, no physical damage to any cable or connector. By noon, Meridian's lead architect, a man named Douglas Fairweather, who had been designing enterprise networks for 23 years and had personally overseen the installation of this very system 4 years ago, had called Vantex's ZOO and used a phrase that cost $2.3 billion worth of trades, another hour of downtime. We're escalating to our engineering team in Austin. Anomalous behavior. That's a very expensive way of saying the system is doing something we have never seen before, and we cannot explain it, and we do not know how to fix it. By 2 p.m., building management had run out of polite options. They called Octane Infrastructure Services. They asked for whoever was available. Reginald Okafor was available. He had started Octane 19 years ago out of the back of a Dodge Caravan with $4,000 in savings, a rack of used diagnostic tools, and a client list of exactly one. A dental office in Concord that needed someone to run cable through a drop ceiling and set up a wireless router. He had grown it from that one dental office into a company that held maintenance contracts with 32 commercial buildings in the Charlotte metro area. Small stuff, mostly. HVAC control systems, building automation, network infrastructure for tenants who needed more than their landlord would provide. Not glamorous, not the kind of work that got written up in trade publications. The kind of work that kept the lights on and the systems running, building by building, year by year, without anyone ever noticing unless something went wrong. His daughter Imani sometimes asked him why he didn't go after bigger clients. He always told her the same thing. The bigger the client, the smaller they make. You feel before they admit they need you. He had learned that somewhere around year 3 of the business, when a property manager at a downtown office tower and wait in the basement for 40 minutes and wait for 40 minutes before anyone would acknowledge he'd been called. He had done the work anyway, fixed the problem anyway, left without saying a word about the elevator or the waiting. On the drive home, he had stopped at a red light and thought about his father, a man who had spent 34 years repairing industrial equipment in a plant in Greensboro, who had known those machines the way some men know scripture, and who had never once been asked his opinion about how they should be maintained. His father had told him once, "They don't pay you for what you know, Reggie. They pay you for what you fix." He had never forgotten that. By the time he walked into the Vantex sub-basement at 2:30 that afternoon, he had been repairing network infrastructure for 27 years. He had seen more failure modes than most certified architects encountered in their entire careers, because certified architects worked on new systems and healthy systems, and systems that failed in textbook ways. Reginald worked on systems that failed the way buildings fail, slowly, eccentrically, in ways that were shaped by every decision made during construction, every modification made after the fact, every tenant who had added something without telling anyone. He had learned that the difference between a system you understand and a system that defeats you is almost never the hardware. It is almost always the history. He stood in front of rack 14C for 4 minutes without touching anything. Preston Marsh, the Caltech engineer, stood off to one side and watched. Caulfield had come back in, apparently unable to stay away, wearing the expression of a man determined, not arms folded. "Are you going to look at the diagnostic logs?" Preston asked. Not hostile. Genuinely curious. Already looked. When? Before I came in. Building management gave me access to the monitoring portal remotely. I reviewed the last 14 hours of telemetry on the drive over. Preston blinked. "And? Tell me something," Reginald said. He hadn't moved. His eyes were still on the rack. When Meridian installed this system 4 years ago, was this the original rack configuration? Or was there a refresh somewhere in the middle? Preston looked at Caulfield. Caulfield unfolded his arms. There was a partial expansion 18 months ago. We added processing capacity for a new trading desk. Who did the physically as the original? I don't know. Do you have the change documentation from that expansion? Caulfield's jaw moved. That's a very specific question. Yes, Reginald said, it is. A pause. Caulfield pulled out his phone, made a call. Reginald turned back to the rack. His right hand backed hand came up. Index finger extended. He began tracing the cable runs along the rear of the rack, not pulling anything, not disconnecting anything, just following the path of each bundle with the lightest touch. The way someone reads a line of text they need to memorize. Rack 14C held the core of the network fabric. 8 high-density switches interconnected by a web of fiber that ran in organized bundles from the rear of the rack, up through overhead cable trays to every other rack in the facility. 437 individual fiber connections, every one of them terminated in the preceding 4 years by certified technicians with calibrated tools. Reginald's finger moved slowly, past the first bundle, past the second, along the third bundle, which ran from the core switches down to the edge distribution layer. His finger stopped. It had been moving for less than 3 minutes. "What?" Preston said. He had moved closer without realizing it. Caulfield had moved closer too. Even the Meridian engineer on the laptop, who had been listening with one ear while typing, had gone quiet. Reginald didn't answer immediately. He crouched slightly, bringing his eye level down to the point where the fiber bundle made a 90-degree turn out of the cable management bracket before entering the rear of switch number 6. He looked at that bend for 10 seconds without blinking, then he spoke. "This bend radius." Preston leaned in. "What about it?" "It's tight. All the bends in this run are within spec. Meridian used the correct radius guides during installation. We have documentation." "I know," Reginald said. "This one was within spec when it was installed. It isn't anymore." Preston stared at the fiber. It looked like every other bend in the rack, clean, organized, terminating correctly into the rear panel of the switch. "I don't see anything wrong with it." "The bracket," Reginald said. He pointed to the cable management bracket. A small black metal piece, maybe 3 inches wide, that held the bundle in its 90-degree path. "Do you see how it's sitting?" Preston looked. The bracket appeared normal. "It's mounted correctly." It was mounted correctly. In the 18-month-old expansion, a technician reinstalled this bracket after routing the new cables. They used the original mounting screws, but the original screws were sized for a lighter bundle. Before the expansion, fewer cables ran through this bracket. After the expansion, the bundle was heavier. The screws held, but not completely. Over time, 18 months of vibration from the HVAC, thermal cycling from equipment heating and cooling, normal building movement, the bracket has migrated. He paused. 2 millimeters. The room was very quiet. 2 millimeters is nothing, Caulfield said from behind them. His voice was different now. Not contemptuous, careful. 2 millimeters caused the bracket to apply consistent lateral pressure on the fiber bundle at the bend point. Fiber is glass. It flexes. It tolerates pressure. Up to a point. Reginald straightened up. He looked at Preston, then at the Meridian engineer on the laptop. Single-mode fiber at this bend radius, under this duration of lateral pressure, develops microbending losses. Not enough to fail a standard light loss test. Not enough to trigger a hardware alarm. But enough to create intermittent signal degradation at specific wavelengths. Specifically, the wavelengths that carry your fabric control plane traffic. Pressed it. Preston's mouth opened. He closed it. Opened it again. "The control plane," he said slowly. "Not the data plane." "Correct. The data was getting through. Imperfectly, but enough to pass packet level checks. But the control plane messages, the ones that tell your switches how to route the data, where to send it, how to handle congestion, those were being corrupted just enough to cause timing failures. Your switches were making routing decisions based on information that was arriving 3 to 7 milliseconds late. That's..." Preston stopped. He turned and walked 2 steps away and stood with his hands on top of his head, looking at nothing. 3 to 7 milliseconds would be invisible to a hardware diagnostic. Reginald continued. "Your equipment tests for physical connectivity and signal power. It doesn't test for control plane message timing at the protocol level. Because that's not how fiber fails. That's not in the failure mode library for a 4-year-old system that has never had a problem." Douglas Fairweather, the Meridian leads of experience, who was listening through the laptop speaker, had not said a word in 4 minutes. He said something now. "The expansion cables," he said. "We should have rechecked the bend radii on every affected bracket after adding the new bundle weight. That was an oversight. It was a very simple thing to say." It was also, Reginald understood, a difficult thing for that particular man to say to this particular room. He let it sit without commentary. Caulfield had gone the color of old paper. His cufflinks caught the light when he moved his hands. He moved them now to his pockets. The confident posture was gone. What replaced it wasn't humility, exactly. It was the specific stillness of a man recalculating everything. "Can you fix it?" Caulfield asked. His voice had lost its performance. What was underneath wasn't much softer, but it was real. "Yes," Reginald said. "I need to relieve the lateral pressure on the bend, reroute the affected cables through a corrected bracket, and re-terminate 2 of the fiber runs that may have developed permanent microbending from sustained compression. Then we do a full end-to-end optical time domain reflectometry sweep to confirm there are no residual loss points before you bring the fabric back online." "How long?" 3 hours. Maybe 3.5 if the re-terminations are difficult. Caulfield was quiet. Then, "The Meridian team has been on site since 7 a.m. They couldn't." He stopped. He tried again. "Why did you see this when they didn't?" Reginald picked up his toolkit from the floor. He unzipped it without hurrying. "They were trained to diagnose the system," he said. "I was trained on buildings. I look at what changes over time, not what was wrong from the beginning. Meridian looked for failure in what was installed. I looked for failure in what happened afterward." He took out a fiber inspection scope and turned to the rack. "The system wasn't broken when it was built," he said. "It broke slowly. The way buildings break. 18 months of gravity and heat and vibration, and one bracket that no one thought to check." He began to work. Preston sat down on the floor against the opposite wall, laptop open, watching. He had 19 years of formal education and a dissertation on distributed network architecture sitting in a university library in Pasadena. He did not say a word. He just watched the older man's hands move through the back of the rack with a precision and steadiness that didn't come from a certification program, or a conference room, or a software interface. It came from somewhere else. Somewhere built over years, in basements and crawl spaces and server closets, where no one was watching, and the only measure of your competence was whether the thing worked when you were done. 3 hours, and 22 minutes later, Reginald stepped back from the rack. He zipped his toolkit. He walked the monitoring terminal at the end of the row and pulled up the Fabric Health dashboard. Every switch in the facility showed green. Control plane latency, submillican, packet loss, 0. Signal integrity across all 437 fiber runs, nominal. He picked up his toolkit. He walked toward the door. He had almost reached the biometric checkpoint when Caulfield's voice came from behind him. Not loud. Flat, the voice of a man who has lost an argument he didn't know he was in. "What's your company called?" Reginald stopped, turned. "Octane Infrastructure Services. Do you have a card?" He did. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced one. Plain white, blue lettering, his name, his direct number, the company email. Not impressive, not designed to be. Caulfield took it. He looked at it for a moment in the way people look at objects that have surprised them. "I'll be in contact," he said. "We have 7 facilities across the southeast. I want someone who can look at the history, not just the hardware." He paused. There was something working behind his eyes. Not apology. Men like Caulfield didn't do apology easily, and Reginald didn't need it. Something more like acknowledgement. The particular discomfort of a man who has confused a person's surface for their ceiling and has just been shown how wrong he was. I misjudged the situation," Caulfield said. That was all. He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to walk it back or dress it up. Reginald looked at him. He had heard that sentence, in various forms, more times than he could count. He had stopped needing it to feel different than it did. 7 facilities, he said. "Send me the documentation on each installation. I'll want to see the changelogs going back to day 1. He turned and walked through the biometric checkpoint, out into the corridor and toward the service elevator. He took the service elevator up to the lobby level. He had taken 1,000 service elevators. In 27 years, he stopped noticing them a long time ago. Outside, the Charlotte afternoon was warm. He sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. He called Amaya. She picked up on the second ring. "How'd it go?" "Fine," he said. "Fine how?" He looked out through the windshield at the glass tower. The reflection of the sky in its surface. They needed someone to look at the history, he said. Nobody else did. A pause. Did they treat you right? He thought about the lobby, and the biometric checkpoints, and the service elevator, and Caulfield's cufflinks, and the Caltech lanyard, and the exact quality of the silence in that cold room when the fabric went green. They treated me the way they always do at first, he said, and then the room was different. Imani was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. She was 26 years old, and running the operations side of Octane now had been for 2 years, and she thought the way he thought, not in abstractions but in systems. You going to take the contract? 7 facilities, he said. Southeast portfolio. Yes, good. Another pause. Dad, yeah, let your hands do the talking. He laughed. It was small and real. Where did you hear that? You, she said. You've said it my entire life. He started the engine. The truck pulled out into traffic, past the glass tower, past its clean reflecting sky, moving through the Charlotte afternoon toward the next building, the next system that had broken slowly and been waiting for someone who understood how time changes things. His phone buzzed. A message from Caulfield's assistant. 7 facility addresses. 7 sets of installation documentation requests. He read the message, set the phone on the passenger seat, kept driving. Some victories don't announce themselves. They just change the room. If this story found you at the right moment, you know exactly what to do with it. And if you know someone who has spent years being the most capable person in rooms that kept asking them to use a different door, share this with them. Because sometimes the only thing that needs to change is who gets asked the question.